Well, we have a question over here.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Well, if the very hungry caterpillar is 40 years old, shouldn't it be a butterfly?
Well, it's always... Well, it... Next question.
That question?
Right.
Exactly.
Just one more book, please.
Okay.
Well, I think the genesis for the museum was in the early 1980s. Eric and his wife Bobby went to Japan and realized that there were nearly or over 20 museums in Japan dedicated to the art of picture book art. And this sort of signaled that the Japanese made no distinction between picture book art and any of the other arts, whereas at least in America, I can't speak for Canada, but illustration had been sort of relegated to the cellar as far as artistic expression was concerned.
November 15th, 2008. The world needs more galleries dedicated to children's books. Nick Clark, Chief Director of the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art, gave us a private tour of the gallery. If we lived in Amherst, we'd be there every day. I'm Mark Blevis. On this edition of Just One More Book, Rock Stars of Reading Part 10, Nick Clark and the Carle.
So we're in the large hall here, and I think one of the things that is really important and significant is that Eric did these 4 8 by 16 foot murals, and what's to me very powerful is that the visitors come and they see these, and because they recognize them as by Eric, they're willing to talk about them in terms of modern art. You know, they're willing to make those sort of take those subjective risks that they might not otherwise if these were, placed in a contemporary art museum or something like that. So it all comes back to, people like what they know. And that's obviously what the power of this museum is, that the visitor knows that they're coming to visit friends. What Eric wanted was 2 things. He wanted a permanent museum that honored the art of illustration. And the next important thing he wanted is he wanted a museum that would be the young child, and neither of you are young children, but the young child's next step in the museum experience, starting with the discovery, the Children's Museum. Remember, we got to go play with bubbles and things like that. But to focus that experience to the looking at art. So that's really what this museum constitutes, is honoring the art and really providing that next step in a child, young and old, journey in the museum experience along the way. The museum, they really started thinking seriously about the museum around 1995, and the original idea was a 1,500 square foot space. And then the idea grew, obviously, to 44,000 square feet. And the genesis for that idea was, what do we need to accommodate 3 school buses of children a day? And so at that point, the auditorium, the art studio, we have a reading library, they obviously expanded the number of galleries, and a cafe. So this is, one of the great facilities of the museum, the Penguin Art Studio, and what's important about it is it's open every minute the museum is open. In at least many museums in America, they sort of promote these family days on the 3rd Sunday of the month where you can come and make something. Well, every day you can come and can make something here. And the back of the space is dedicated for special, scheduled groups on busy days, and obviously the entire space is open, and again, collage is one of the leitmotifs of the creative experience. But I have 2 full-time art educators, studio artists that that run the program, then lots of wonderful volunteers as well. So you can come in, do whatever you want, but if you feel you need some guidance, we have people here that can provide that. Initially, he started using commercial papers, and they realized that and commercial papers and rubber cement, all of the no-nos and then he realized that he wasn't able to get the colors that he wanted. So he found a paper, a tissue paper, and then what he does is he covers it with a sort of a special, the one secret he keeps is what he actually covers that paper with, and then he starts painting. And what he does is he just paints papers.
Like this?
Like this. He says, oh, today will be a blue and black day, or oh, today will be a yellow and green day. And he just paints papers, and then he puts them away very carefully in color-coded drawers. And then when he's working on a book, he says, oh yes, I did that wonderful blue background with some streaks of black. That would make a terrific night sky. And he knows exactly where it is. He goes in and then incorporates it into the book. And just because it's a book for children doesn't mean that it's simple and that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it. So in this little display, which we're calling The Birth of a Book, we're looking at a book that Eric did in 2002. So this was really the summer of 2001 when he was just up to his ears in meetings about the museum and everything was just going like that. And he goes into his studio and he puts up a do not disturb sign and he says, what's the complete opposite of what I've been doing? A sloth. So that was the birth of the book. Slowly, 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 said the sloth. And what we're trying to show is how he works. And so what he will do is he creates a very preliminary kind of book, and these are called dummies, but these are just little mock-ups. And what you'll see, these are just 3 of probably about 15 of these. Ones? These are the actual dummies. So there's a tremendous working and reworking. And then he'll do some drawings to scale. And then what happened in this instance, you'll notice that there are 2 works that look very finished. The one in the center, he did the entire art for the book and realized it was too fussy. He said, I illustrated it, I didn't design it. So he went back and he started all over again. And I think you can see the one on the right is a little bit less, it's cleaner and crisper.
It has more depth to it.
Yeah. They took an approach, this visual thinking strategies, which is predicated on 3 questions. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more do you see? So that the person leading the discussion is not just spouting information, is really trying to engage that group in a discussion, and they have to be good listeners, good paraphrasers, and most important of all, non-judgmental, so that each participant, no matter what they say, it's validated. Just to build that confidence that, there isn't necessarily an absolute right answer in looking at art. And that's sadly, too many people just believe, they have no trouble reading, whether it's a newspaper or a book or something like that, and having an opinion about what they've seen in the words. But it didn't transfer for some reason. As I like to say, we learn to read through picture books, but the pictures get left behind. This is a wall of some of Eric's non-picture book art, what he refers to as his After 5 art, where he's actually taking some of the materials that he's used to create the textures on his papers and things like that, and then recombine them into a composition. You may have noticed over in the process gallery the board on which he often does some of the painting and things like that, and how it takes on this wonderful colored texture. Well, that's what this is. It's just been cut up and recombined. But here too, the visitor recognizes they're by Eric, so they're willing to think about them in terms that they might not otherwise. In the central wall is a little photobiography of Eric. He was born in Syracuse, New York, to German parents, and in 1934, his grandmother came back to America because 3 of her children had emigrated. So she came back with the express purpose of luring one of them back to Germany, and it was Eric's parents that fell for the bait. And so they moved back to Germany in 1935, an ill-timed move in retrospect. And a couple of very important things. When he was in first grade, his teacher, Miss Fricky, recognized that he really had a talent, and he brought Eric's parents in and said, "This boy can draw, don't discourage him." And happily for Eric, his father had wanted to be an artist, so it fell upon sympathetic ears. But when they moved back to Germany, he went from this very open, nurturing kind of environment to a pretty strict and rigid kind of school system. And this teacher here, Herr Kraus, Fridolin Kraus was his name, and he was Eric's teacher in high school. And again, he recognized this is in Germany, during the war, he recognized Eric's ability, World War II, yes, good for you. He recognized Eric's ability and invited him back to his house to show him the art that was being recognized by the German government, Hitler's government at the time, as the art of the degenerates. And it was people like Matisse and Picasso and some of the German expressionists, people who were drawing outside of the lines. And that was a great personal risk to Herr Kraus to do that. And once again, that was just another very important moment in Eric's life to realize that his talent was being recognized. Yeah, Eric came back to America. He always knew he wanted to come back to America. And he was actually working as a graphic designer doing advertisements Madison Avenue in New York is synonymous with, if you think of Madison Avenue, you think of advertising. I've got a question. Yes?
Is that him?
And that's Eric. You see Eric is in a suit and a tie because he is being an executive, and he didn't want to do that. And so he said, I'm going to leave being an executive. I want to get back to making art. So he just went out on his own. He was still doing art for advertising, and it's not up, but at one time he did a lobster that was done in his signature collage style for an advertisement for something called chlormetryton, which is an antihistamine. And a fellow named Bill Martin Jr. saw the lobster and was creating a book called Brown Bear, What Do You See? And he loved the bold design of the lobster. So he called Eric up and said, would you like to illustrate this book for me? And Eric had never done this before. He said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. So he did it, he got paid, and he said, hey, this is pretty good. And that was done in 1967. 2 years later, he created The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And those were the beginning of a career of over 70 books for children.
Two defining books.
And 2 defining books. As Eric said, if I had tried to become a children's illustrator, I probably would have failed. I just sort of slithered into it. One evening at a dinner party, my wife mentioned the book Paddle to the Sea by Holling C. Holling.
Yes.
And one of the guests at dinner was the recently retired distinguished professor of American art at Wellesley College, one of the great women's colleges in America. Big 6'8", strapping guy, booming voice, and he hears Paddle to the Sea, and he said, did you say Paddle to the Sea? And we all just kind of, shrunk back. And he said, I grew up in a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood in West St. Louis where books were not a part of my life, but that book changed my life. May I see it? And Trinket, my wife, went upstairs and got her very early edition of the book. So here's this 68-year-old, 6'8" strapping bear of a guy caressing this book. And this was before the museum opened, but I knew from that moment that we were going to make a difference, because all of us have those books in us.